Today's presentation is about factors that matter a lot more than where you went to law school. And I think one of the things is a lot of attorneys really do believe that the law school that they went to, and even law students, is among the most important things. And to some extent, it is important. And I'm going to tell you the reasons law schools are important, but in other reasons, it's actually not that important at all. And so I'm going to walk through all that today. And then when I'm done, I will take questions, and pretty much as many questions as anyone has, we'll get through. And that's that. So let's get started. So the first thing is the law school you went to really is much more important when you're in school than at any other time. When you get out of law school, all sorts of things happen that determines how much your law school matters. But when you're in school, really the only thing that the law firms have to compare you against, or employers have to compare you against, are other students that you're competing with for the same jobs. And so that's one reason that school is considered so important at that time. But after you've been out of school for a while, it assumes a much less importance. And the things that kind of become more important as time goes on tend to be like your practice area, the employer that you're working with, where you've been trained, the amount of business you have, the reputation you built for yourself, and some other things. And actually, the longer you've been out of law school, once you've been out more than 5 years, it does fade into the background. There are going to be some firms that are always going to be concerned about it. But for the most part, the substantial majority of firms, meaning over 70% of them are going to be, even large firms, are going to be more concerned with these other things than they are of the quality of law school you went to. And one of the big mistakes, by the way, that a lot of people make that went to good law schools is they assume that their success and so forth is really going to be guaranteed by the quality of school they went to. And all the quality of school you went to really shows, and I'll talk about this in a minute, is your past motivation, grades, and aptitude for practicing law. It doesn't show what you did with the skills and so forth that you have. A lot of times people that went to good law schools too, they believe that a law firm should be very happy to have someone from that school, and that they think they should be, that having this great school in their background makes them special and so forth. And most law firms will very quickly disabuse people of that, regardless of the quality of the law firm, once you've been out for a while. And because if you act you're special because of your law school, you'll tend to get poor reviews, no assignments, no work, and so forth. And honestly, while law firms care about your school to some extent, and to a great extent, when you're looking for your first jobs, it really does assume much less importance later on. And the big thing to understand is it's just a way for law firms to distinguish you when you're coming out of school. If there's roughly 30,000 people coming out of law school a year, there's only going to be 550 people of those people are going to be from Harvard Law School, 175 from University of Chicago, 175 from Yale Law School, and so forth, and 350 from University of Virginia and Michigan and Columbia. And so there's a small percentage of people that are going to the top law schools of the annual graduates, and how well you did in those schools will determine who gets the most competitive jobs when you get out. But that's really the extent of it. And in the real world, when I talk to attorneys, a lot of my practice, or the majority of my practice these days, I work with a lot of associates, but I also work with many partners. And I honestly, when I'm talking to partners, that's really the last thing in the world I'm concerned about, is where they went to school. It's something that just doesn't matter. To some extent, it has some importance, but really the law firms at the stage when you've been out of school 8 or 10 years, it's not something that's important. So regardless of where you went to school, you should be thinking about the things that you can do to look like a good attorney, because a lot of times people that may not have gotten into a good law school because of their LSATs or poor performance and grades, and maybe they majored in a very difficult science when they were in school, but people that didn't go to good law schools initially have incredible careers, and they take the rejection that they may have gotten from not going to a good law school, or maybe they got a scholarship somewhere, and they turn that into something really awesome. Really, but the things I'm going to teach you about today are really the things that matter the most in terms of how law firms will think about you once you've been out for a while. Okay, I want to give you in this webinar some really good advice, and the advice will help you if you're going to a big firm out of school. It will help you stay in a big firm. If you're currently in a big firm, it will help you stay there. If you're at a small firm, it will help you get into a big firm. and it will really give you the tools that will show you what you need to do in order to be successful practicing law. And this is actually going to be very good advice because whoever, regardless of what stage in your career you are, because I think a lot of people just don't understand this stuff, and because of that, their careers don't go anywhere near, or they don't have anywhere near the level of success they should practicing law, and this should help. But as I said earlier, when you're coming out of law schools do not have, or law firms do not have any basis to compare you to other people that they're potentially hiring, except for the law school you went to. Obviously, people are going to think that Harvard is a better law school than University of Kentucky because Harvard is very difficult to get into, and there may only be one or two people from Kentucky to go there each year, whereas there's a whole class of people from Kentucky at University of Kentucky. They just have no other basis for that. And then very well nationally known firms want to hire people from the best law schools because that's important to their clients. But as time goes by, other things are going to be way more important than whether or not you have a good law school on your resume. So here's a couple things that you always need to remember about what the law school you went to shows. And I almost hate to put this in here because it can be demotivating if you didn't go to a good law school, but I want you to understand the thinking process of large law firms and other people, so you have the ability to understand where they're coming from. And I don't like saying this stuff because it's difficult for a lot of people to absorb, and it's not nice, but it's just what it is. So I'm going to tell you this, and then this is what you're up against depending on the law school you went to. So the first thing is, if you went to a top law school, it's almost always going to show that you did very well in the LSAT and had good grades wherever you went to college. So the college you went to is also important. I'll talk about that in a second. But your LSAT score is very important, and so are your grades. Grades show long-term motivation. They show having the ability to understand concepts and to impress teachers and to consistently do work that's required to excel compared to your peers. All these sorts of things that you would want your lawyer to have the ability to do against other lawyers. The LSAT also tests your ability to reason and to think and to reach conclusions and to use logic. I believe a lot of the stuff that you are tested on in the LSAT is teachable and once you've been practicing law, but it does show kind of your initial discipline. And the thing is to understand is I see people all the time that went to schools, Florida State, or went to community colleges and then transferred to other schools and so forth, and did very well in the LSAT and got into great law schools and got great grades. Really, what it comes down to for most law schools, not all of them, but for most top law schools, it comes down to your grade point average and your LSAT score. And they want to take that information and they will create a number, and they will weigh certain things more heavily than others. Some schools will weigh grades more heavily than the LSAT, but for the most part, they use those two things to admit you. So the people that have done the best in those two typically get into the best schools. Some very competitive schools, which would be Chicago, Yale, Stanford, and a few others, they'll look very closely at your college and sometimes even give you points if you went to a really good high school. They'll look at all sorts of things. But for the most part, when they have very high achieving people applying with high numbers. But for the most part, the college you went to isn't that important. I've seen lots of people go to community colleges for a few years, get a 4.0, and then transfer to a big state school and get great grades, ace the LSAT, and go to Harvard Law School. Harvard has a lot of spots, and so does Michigan, and so does a lot of other big schools. So you can get into a lot of very good law schools, almost regardless of where you went to college, and without any extracurricular activities and all sorts of things, with good grades and a good LSAT score. But the thing is, your LSAT is very important, and it's not a test that everyone does well on, obviously, but that's one thing that the law schools tend to emphasize. The reason I think the LSAT's important is because of what I've seen from the highest scores on that test when I've practiced law against them. They tend to really have the ability to figure out problems very quickly. They come up with solutions to problems quickly without a lot of fluff. They understand things and they're very direct in their thinking. There's just a lot of advantages to having a mind that works that way. I believe that people that practice law for a long time can learn all this type of thinking, but at the same time, your ability to do well on that test does say something about your your aptitude for practicing law and even how well you may do. I've worked with, in my company, I've hired several attorneys that have scored almost at the very top 170s and that sort of thing. And they're much better at figuring out issues and not getting distracted and focused on what the things are. And an important test. So the idea is that if you do well on that test and you do well and you go to a good law school, that you're probably going to have some pretty good legal abilities or the potential of that. And attorneys are paid to sit at desks. They're paid to read and figure things out. They're paid to figure out what the truth of things are and what's not the truth to prevent people from pushing one over on them. And that's what attorneys do all day long. They play games with opposing counsel. They play games with contracts. They play games. They're always trying to convince someone and hide the truth and get and make their clients win by getting a point across a certain way. So all this stuff is just very important. It's important to have those abilities and to develop them. And that's one of the things that go into a good law school shows. It doesn't mean that the law school is teaching anything differently than another law school. The quality of people you spend your time with at the law school will have something to do with it. But what it does show is where you're able to gain admittance will show typically your aptitude for practicing law and how hard you're working. So the LSAT's important, probably more so than your grades. And the odds are just that if you got into a top law school, the odds are pretty good that you have a great aptitude for practicing law and you'll be able to work very hard there as well. And also when you go to a good law school, you're surrounded by professors that tend to be very good, that can get ideas across in a better way. Many times that you're surrounded by people on the cutting edge of different issues in terms of what they think. You're surrounded by students that are very motivated, and their thinking and their motivation and their goals that they set for themselves will rub off on you. And so all these things are very positive, and you'll tend to become similar to the types of attorneys that are going to those big firms. Now, I want to say at the outset that none of this really matters. It's not to say that going to a good law school is what's going to make you a good attorney, but it does say that going to a good law school, it does show you have a lot of aptitude to be a good attorney. And the more you spend your time around the best people and you're taught by the best people, that can help as well. And one of the things I would say, though, is that just because you went to a good law school, and no sense of the imagination means that you're going to have a great career. And in fact, having a good career in practicing law is more about social things and the work you do and the practice area you choose and the decisions you make than it is about your law school. Your law school honestly is fairly meaningless after several years, as I said earlier. And many attorneys go to good law schools and just bomb out very quickly because they don't follow the rules and so forth that I'm going to talk to you about today. So here are 10 more factors, or 10 factors that are more important than where you went to law school. And these are things that you really need to keep in mind throughout your career, or regardless of where you are in your career, because the dumbest thing you can do is have a chip on your shoulder about the quality of law school you went to and just keep that around your whole career. All it shows is how hard you worked when you were younger and how hard you did on the test, or it may show you didn't want to go to a school where you didn't have a lot of debt. I have an in-law, and I think he went to Florida State. He went to Florida State and got great grades and took the LSATs and did very well, and then got some scholarships and was going to stay in Florida and go to school there. And I said, and he was getting scholarships to all these different places, and he was going to do that. And then I talked to him and I said, you should go to NYU, which is another school he got into. So he went there, and now he's been at Skadden for several years. Going to a good school can make a big difference. I doubt he would be at Skadden if he'd taken a scholarship, but at the same time, there's a lot of factors that matter more of where you went to law school. So the first thing that's very important is your previous on-the-job training or your current on-the-job training. And what that means is the quality of firm that you are working at or have worked at in the past. So working with very good people typically means that those people are going to be training you. And if good people are training you, then that means that you're typically learning how to practice law in a certain style with a certain level of detail and certain levels of insights and a certain quality of work and so forth that you may not get at another firm. So a lot of times people will come out of schools that aren't that great, and they will go to work for exceptional attorneys, and those attorneys will train them and work with them very closely. and they'll become very good attorneys because of that. And or they'll get into a really good firm eventually. So the better the attorneys you're working with, the more likely you are to be able to move up to better firms, and the better attorney you're going to be. So I really firmly believe that the quality of attorneys that you work with is much more important than where you went to law school. You should always try to work with the best attorneys you can when you get out of school, or when you're trying to move up in different firms. If you're trying to move to a better firm, there's people become more defined over time by the quality of firm that they work with than where they went to law school. So if you come out of a bad law school and then eventually you end up at Latham and Watkins or something, that's going to define you in a much more positive light than where you went to law school, because not everybody that goes to a really good law school can get a job at Latham and Watkins or Skadden or something like that. So the quality of firm that you ultimately get into is much more important. And many people start out in small firms. Many people start out in 2 or 3 person law firms, and then over time, by doing many of the things I'm going to talk to you about today, end up in really good firms. So the firm you're at and the quality of firm, even if it's a small firm where you're working for a very well-known attorney in your practice area, is much more important than your law school, because that says more about the quality of attorney you're going to be than it says, or it can be an R, than it says about where you went to law school. Where you went to law school is just a function of what you did when you were 18 to 20, 21, 22 years old. Where you go to, where you work and where you end up is a much different calculation. And some people take longer to bloom than others. But being trained by people that are well known, or a firm with certain qualities, is very important. There's certain firms in New York, for example, that will only hire laterally from a couple different types of firms. And there's firms in different cities that will only hire from other big firms. And it's like that in many markets. But even a solo practitioner, if you work for a very well known and a good solo practitioner, lots of law firms will be interested potentially in hiring you. It just depends on the person you start with and the kind of experience you get with them. And that's, nothing is really more important ultimately in your career than the training you get by people outside. You don't really learn to practice law at all in a law firm, in law school. All you learn in law school is you learn some methods of the basics about what you need to know to be an attorney, and then the material kind of has time to sink in, and you can learn about different areas of the law and kind of broaden your mind. Most people believe that law school could probably be 2 years, but it just depends. Even beyond working in a law firm, you can also work in other areas, like work for a federal judge or a well-known state judge, and that can be good training. You can work in the patent and trademark office and get very good training, and that's thought of highly by law firms. Or you can work in a prosecutor's office. So there's many practice settings outside of law firms that are thought of very highly, and that you can get, and that law firms will hire. So the other thing that's important, just to follow up on this, because I want to make sure that I really make this point to everyone, is where you're working, where the quality of firm you're at, the reputation of that firm, the reputation of that employer is always going to be more important than where you went to law school. There's just nothing more important than it. Being able to get into a top law firm and stay there is very important. And you can start out at a very small firm, and over time, you can move to a better firm. So you don't always need to get into the best law firm out of law school. But if you do, being in the best quality law firm is very important. Okay, the next thing that's important, extremely important, is how you did in law school. If you did very well in law school, the prestige of the law firm or the law school you went to continues to matter less and less. Many times, if you graduate at the very top of your class, even from a 4th-tier law school, that's still enough to get you into many law firms. And it's very important to do well in most law schools if they're not in the top law schools. And it's just important because the law firms want to see something that distinguishes you from the average attorney that worked in one of those law firms. That's just very important. So you need to make sure that you do the best. And if you did well in law school, within reason, law firms aren't going to care as much about where you went to law school. I've seen people do very well in even schools that are barely accredited in California that aren't that good, and get jobs in top law firms and the best law firm, but they did very well there. If you do go to a low rank law school, you're doing well there, makes a big difference. The other thing that's important is your practice area. Your practice area is extremely important. And what happens is when attorneys get out of school, they typically will go in one direction and they'll choose a practice area. And after a period of time, there's not many people doing that particular practice area. The fewer people that are doing that practice area is very important. And the fewer people the fewer experts there are in your practice area, the better you'll do. It's very common, for example, for patent attorneys to go to schools that aren't very good for law school. And that happens for a lot of reasons. One is because science people typically don't talk a lot about where to go to law school. So many times they'll just go to the one that gives them the best deal, or many times they don't go to the best school because science classes tend to have big curves and it's harder to get great grades in science. And other times they may not do well in law school because there's all sorts of things. So science people tend to start out in people that become patent attorneys in small firms and not get jobs in large law firms because large law firms are very difficult to get into. But they almost always, if they want to, can work in big law firms later because there's not a lot of people like them. And it's like that for all sorts of practice areas. It's like that for ERISA. It's like that for healthcare. It's like that for many practice areas. And I could discuss them all day, but there's certain types of practice areas where being marketable is very easy to do. One thing I will say is that, and I was making this point here earlier, but I mean, it's not that important. The attorneys, if you want to switch practice areas, like law firms only want people typically, if you're trying to move to a better firm, that are in your practice area. So you can't really switch practice areas that easily. I've seen attorneys from Cravath considered probably in terms of New York firms, one of the best, top 5 probably, and well, definitely top 5. And someone that's in corporate there couldn't go to any other firm in New York and do litigation, or at least any other big firm. And you need to stick with your practice area, and you need to be in a marketable practice area. And if your practice area is marketable, you can do very well. The more niche your practice area, the fewer people that do it, the more likely you are to be able to move to large law firms. And there's all sorts of practice areas that are very niche. And part of my job is in my business is finding people that, where there's not a lot of them. And right now, it sounds crazy, but right now, one of the practice areas that's really in demand is family law, people that are doing that type of work. And in other times, it could be insurance coverage, and now in certain areas of the country, it's litigators with trial experience that are senior. You just never know, but your practice area, it makes a huge difference. And it's something that matters a great deal. And then there's other practice areas where it's very difficult for the most part to ever transition unless you have a big book of business. So like litigation is one of them. It's very difficult for litigators that are senior to move firms unless they have a lot of business. It just depends. Corporate tends to be a practice area where people can often move when they're senior, but your practice area is very important. And litigation is a practice area where I like to say that there's litigators in a lot of areas just coming out of the walls, because most people, you're taught in law school how to be a litigator. Most litigators, most law firms are overwhelmed with litigators because there's so many of them. But the practice area really matters a lot more than the law school in the long run, because there's just certain attorneys that there's not a lot of them. Right now, a very in-demand practice area is data privacy. It may not be a practice area that's in demand in the future, but it is right now. So your practice area can just make a huge difference. And it's difficult for attorneys to choose the right practice area. When I was coming out of school, so many people wanted to do environmental, but then that practice area just died. And the practice area you're in is very important. So here's some practice areas I just want you to see that where firms don't care that much about where you went to law school. Anything related to patent law. I've seen attorneys go to 4th-tier law schools and work in major firms doing patent law. For the most part, they care more about your undergraduate and graduate degrees and experience in patent law than they do your law school. ERISA and executive compensation is another one. I've seen lots of senior attorneys, even without business, get jobs in this practice area. It's fairly easy to move in that practice area, especially if you're more junior with executive compensation. In particular, when corporate's very active, it can become very easy for attorneys to move. And when it's not, it can become very difficult. Many corporate attorneys with small law firms can move. There's not a lot of people that not a lot of highly qualified corporate attorneys out there in different markets. If you have that kind of experience, law firms really like corporate attorneys because they also can bring in business to other practice areas in the firms. They like that. Another one is real estate. That can be a very good practice area to be in when the market's active. Law schools or law firms care less about more about your experience there than they tend to care about your law school. Healthcare has been active the past several years. Same thing. Your law school doesn't matter as much. Immigration is another one. Most immigration attorneys, it's not a practice area that traditionally attracts people from the best law schools. And because the jobs don't pay very much, but your practice, your experience doesn't, your law school doesn't matter very much there. Trust in estates is another one where it's just so specialized. There's not a lot of people that do it. And just some other ones that I didn't list here, but our family law is another one, like I brought up, insurance defense, and there's several other practice areas, personal injury, that it doesn't really matter. But if you want to work in a big law firm, immigration, trust in estates, corporate, ERISA, and patent law are all things that where your law school doesn't really matter. It's not, people just, the firms and people just don't care about it that much. The other thing that matters a lot to firms when they're hiring laterally is how long you stay in your legal jobs and your stability there. Law firms, what they really want is they want people who are likely to stay employed and remain there for a long period of time. It's a lot of work hiring. It takes, and it's a lot of work training people and introducing them to clients. And it's just all this stuff is a lot of work. And there's some people that will come into legal organizations and get along very well with everyone there. And they're always happy and productive, while others will join law firms and have the opposite experience. And I always give this example, but when I first started BCG, I hired one person that had been at her previous employer 17 years, and the other person that had been there at her previous employer, I don't know, 8 years. And the person that had been there 17 years stayed 17 years at our firm before retiring. And the person that had been at her previous employer 8 years stayed here, I don't know, 8 to 10 years or something. So a lot of times people will go into organizations and they'll have kind of a time limit when they self-destruct and leave, and other people will go into organizations and they'll just make things work. Over a 17-year period, when a company is starting and growing and going through growing pains and more growing pains, and it takes a lot of resilience for one person to remain that long. And that's what this person did. And it's pretty awesome. Other people can't do that. Other people will leave all the time. So there's just certain people that will stick around. And if a law firm believes that you're a stable person that will stick around, this means you're likely to stay in your next job as well. Law firms are much more willing to take a chance on you if they believe that you've been well trained and you have various abilities and so forth, than if the opposite is true. And law firms want you to stay in a position. And if they see you have a lot of employment stability, that's in many cases just as important to them as where you went to law school. It depends on the firm, of course, but for many firms, it's extremely important and just something that they take very serious. And just seeing stability, seeing that you're not going to move for trivial reasons. And because think about it, if you had to hire someone, let's say, to work in your house and take care of your kids. I'm just giving an example. Would you want someone that is going to leave suddenly for no reason, and then you're going to have to hire another person and go through the whole thing of interviewing all these people, or would you want to hire someone that you thought was going to work out and stay and get through different problems and so forth? And that's the kind of people that most law firms want as well. The other thing that law firms take very seriously, and arguably this could be the number one thing in terms of what's most important to law firms, is the amount of business you have. When you get 5 or 6 years out of law school and know what you're doing, and if you have enough business and you're at a high enough billing rate, your law school becomes completely unimportant. Law firms function and they only run if attorneys have business. So a law firm simply cannot function without attorneys in it that have a lot of business. So if you join a firm and that firm and you have a lot of business, that firm is going to want you around there. And essentially the way to think of a law firm is a business unit that it's a support system for partners with business. It will hire associates for them. It gives them a brand. It gives them office space, secretaries, word processing, computers, IT, a website. Like, it does all these things for the partners. In exchange, they take a lot of money. So law firms need to support all that. And in order to support all that, they need to have attorneys that have a lot of business. And nothing is really more important to your long-term career than having business. It matters more than your law school. It matters more than anything. And you need to disabuse yourself very quickly, if you haven't already, whether or not you're a law student or you're an attorney, of how important the business is compared to anything else. Once you have business, you're the one calling the shots. Law firms will come after you and court you, and you can move to the largest law firms that you never even dreamed possible, and the most prestigious law firms if you have enough business and big enough clients. And I'm not trying to reinforce business. I know I've done that. I think I did it last week about how important it is, but nothing's more important than the amount of business you have once you get more than a few years out of school. And that should be a priority for you, learning how to get business and getting business. But that's just, I don't know what else to say, except that I've seen attorneys get jobs with AmLaw 100 law firms that had lots and lots have worked at 20 firms. It's just law firms need business for them to survive. And certain law firms have different reputations than others and are more tolerable of weaknesses, but they really look the other way at some extraordinary behavior. If you have enough business, then some things in your background that may not be good if you have enough business in order to bring you on if you have a lot of business, because law firms need business. Now, I'm not saying that law firms will do illegal things, but they'll certainly look the other way of your law school. They'll look if you've worked in too many firms. If you've worked in 5 firms in 15 years, or I don't know, that's probably not that bad. 5 firms in 10 years or something. They'll look the other way about a lot of different things if you have a lot of business, because law firms rely on business to keep themselves healthy. Okay, the other thing that's important is your reputation. Many people have very good reputations in their practice area and are known. You may be, depending on how much you impress attorneys in other firms, and you gain a reputation for having very good credentials and experience in your practice area, then where you went to law school is going to matter less and less. There are certain attorneys that are considered the expert in whatever different types of litigation or different types of healthcare or different types of patents, and having a really good reputation in that practice area, and then being well known as a leader in your practice area to attorneys at other firms and in the legal community is huge. There's certain attorneys that can get jobs even without business based on having such a good reputation. I've had many cases where I've had a candidate that I may have called the firm about, and the firm already knows who the person is, and the person has such a great reputation that they practically want to hire them without even interviewing them. And honestly, there's attorneys that have that a good enough reputation that people would hire them without interviewing them. And it doesn't matter where you go to law school if you have a really good reputation. If your reputation is excellent and other attorneys are aware of your reputation, then that can help you. And you may ask, like, how does your reputation precede you? Some things can happen. For example, if you didn't go to a great law school and you were up in a trial, I once knew an attorney that came out of a bad law school and didn't do particularly well there. And he was hired by a major law firm that he opposed right after a trial, and because he was so impressed with his performance. And other people are active speakers, or they're active in doing a certain type of case, or they write articles or law review articles and so forth about a certain topical area, or they may be well-known scholars in constitutional law or something. But there's just all sorts of things. If you have a really good reputation, that law firms will be interested, and it becomes very important. People have a reputation, and the reputation is based on things like being fair. It may be based on being competent. It may be based on having good values. It can be based on all sorts of things. And the best attorneys, if you have a very good reputation, they will respect that, and you will get hired because of it. And people will ignore your law school because of it. Another thing that's very important is your interest in your practice area and community involvement. That is exceptionally important. Your interest in your practice area is if some people get out there and they will teach classes, they'll be speaking at seminars, they may write papers, they may be leaders in various bar association areas. And if you do enough of that, you may start to become relatively well known among other attorneys, and this is going to help you. And then people will not define you based on your law school, they'll define you based on this. People really, in terms of attorneys, people generally are only defining attorneys based on their law school when they don't have anything else to define them by. If people can define you by all these other things, and that's how they will define you. And so that's how you want to be defined. You want to be defined by your activities, by your business, by your reputation, and not by your law school. Again, the law school is something is based many times on decisions you may have made in your early 20s. And so it's not really that important to make a deal out of. It's just your other things that you do later in your career are going to be important. The best attorneys typically, if you looked at their LinkedIn profiles, you looked at their speeches and other things, there's a lot of stuff and things that they list on their law firm websites. There's a lot of things that show commitment. And I know some law firms that won't interview lateral partners and so forth unless they have a minimum number of connections and they can tell how much business they have from their profiles. And so your involvement in the community and interest in what you're doing are hugely important. And all this stuff shows the level of commitment you have to practicing law. And it also shows that you're unlikely to go anyplace else. Stick with it. Law firms want to have people that they can plug in to their machinery, which is the law firm, and have them do a really good job. And this is really going to separate you from people that are flakes. A lot of people, one of the things if you're young, you'll see it. If you're older, I'm sure you'll recognize this, and you might even be part of this crowd, but it's never too late to change. There's a lot of people they're just kind of flitting around. They're not committing to anything. They're not interested they don't know what they want to do. They're just experimenting with practice areas and firms and practice settings and all these different things. And so you need to be someone that looks committed and that is in it for the long haul and is unlikely to leave. And those are the kind of people where the law school you went to doesn't matter as much. The world is full of people that don't really know what they want to do. And anything that shows that is really not that important. It's going to hurt you. Okay, so another thing that's important is your personality, your looks, your dress, and so forth, and just how you come across. And I talk to attorneys all day, and there's some attorneys when I get them on the phone and I'm talking to them that I know will do well in interviews, and I know just because of the way they connect with the people they're talking to, and when they're talking to me, and I can tell a lot about how a person will present themselves many times right when I get them on the phone. And so how you present yourself is important. You should look to present yourself in a very positive way. And you want to look as good as possible to your interviewers, and you want to sound good, and you want to present well, and you want to be focused, and you want to work on your personality. And I understand that this kind of stuff can be offensive to some people, but when you're getting hired by a firm, they're hiring you because they need work done, but they're also hiring you because they want people that are representing them in the marketplace. And so that means they want to have people that have a certain type of personality. It also means that you're kind of part of their team. And so they want to, be around people that they believe can be not their friends, but I think people that relate to them and that they can be comfortable with and that sort of thing. So all that is very important. Just having a good appearance is important. I see a lot of people in firms that really keep themselves up well, and I think that helps them if you look healthy and so forth. People that take good care of themselves tend to get more jobs than those that don't. People want to have people that kind of look robust and excited and a good personality and that reflect well on the firm. And that doesn't mean that you have to get made up for all your interviews, but in firms, but it just means that you want to come across as dressed and professional and really reflective of the way the law firm wants to see themselves as a brand. And I had one woman that was 15 years out of law school in a really not a very good practice area and she got several offers, and I had no idea what she looked like. I was more concerned with the quality of her resume and experience. And she asked about not talking about her being married and so forth in their interviews. And I really didn't understand what was going on with that. The point is, the things is, people sometimes get interviews based on how they look. And I think it can help whether it's men or women. And it's just something to be aware of. It's not something to get mad at me about. I'm just a messenger here. And the other thing is the personality. You're looking at the whole package. So it's how you dress, it's your personality, it's your appearance and all that. And so you need to work on all of those things. You need to like your interviewers. So people that have come across as extremely likable and really like their interviewers tend to get many more jobs than those that don't. So all those things are important, and that matters more, I think, than where you went to law school, and more so than looks. By the way, I think the personality matters. A very likable personality is huge. You want the people to like you, and if they like you, it really does make a big difference. And so even someone that's attractive that has a bad personality is likely to have a hard time getting hired. So these are all things, that I have observed. This kind of makes me uncomfortable talking about this, but I'm just trying to let you know that it's important. The different types of people are more likely to get hired. Young people are more likely to get hired than older people that are thin and tall, for example, more likely to get hired than short. These are all things that people know. You're not supposed to talk about it, but it's just socially withdrawn are less likely to get hired than more social people. It's just personality, and all this stuff matters a great deal. So all these things you can work on, and none of it really matters that much if you fix it. If you're socially withdrawn, you need to try to be more outgoing in interviews. You need to try, if you're not a good dresser, you need to try to be a good dresser. If you don't cut your hair, you should probably try to cut your hair. All these sorts of things make a difference. I see people from Harvard, Yale, and other great schools have a hard time getting jobs, and many of them just are too nerdy. They can't connect with people, and you just need to be outgoing and likable. And not everybody's outgoing. It's not to say that's the norm for attorneys. You want to, if people are going to be paying you money and you're going to be working with them and they're going to be giving you a paycheck every couple of weeks and so forth, they want to be likable. And I remember, this is a quick kind of thing here, but when I was practicing law in a large New York firm, I was at a dinner or lunch with an associate, and he was telling the other associates about dress and how important the ties they wore and so forth. And back in that day, I think all these guys wanted to wear the Hermes ties they were expensive. And he said that one of the most important things is when an attorney walks into a room and is billing a client an outrageous amount of money per hour, that the attorney needs to be the most impressive looking and sounding person in the room. And meaning they need to be the best dressed, they need to have the most pleasing personality, and it's what the clients want to see, and it's what the firms want to see. And so all that is very important. And the better off you do with those things, the better off you're going to be. And it is true to some extent. You really want to look the part, and that can make a difference. And attorneys that look the part make everybody look up to them, and that can be helpful. Okay, another thing that's important is your social background. And this can matter more than your law school. There's law firms composed of nothing but Catholic men and women, and a law firm that's is more likely to hire Catholic men than an Orthodox Jewish man. There's law firms that are composed of only Black women, I've seen. They're more likely to hire people than from the background. And there's just all these people, there's all these groups around the country, and many of them are tribal, and they're tribal because they're more comfortable around people that are like them. And that's just kind of what it is. I'm not going to comment on it, whether or not I approve of it or not, but I'm telling you this as an observer. If you are from a certain type of group and didn't go to a great law school, you probably have a much better chance getting hired by groups that are similar to you than other groups. So it's just something to keep in mind. One of the things I found was very interesting is I was dealing with a woman that had taken a job in a relatively small southern town, and everybody in the firm had gone to high school together, or the same high school, and they all knew each other, and they were all friends. And she was in I don't know, some corporate practice area that they needed someone like her from. But she said she literally had no friends in the firm, and no one would deal with her. It was just a very small, closed society, and she didn't like that. And I don't think law firms intentionally discriminate. I think they hire the people that they're most comfortable with. I think that many times they get referrals and so forth from attorneys that are with there. If they recognize people from similar backgrounds, they're more likely to hire them. People that are from an area are more likely to get hired there than others. People, many times who went to local law schools, are more likely to get hired from people that are not from local law schools in many areas. People from well-known families or well-known families locally that are very well respected may be more likely to get hired than people from average families. And so all this stuff can make a big difference depending on where you're trying to work. And these are just some things that I've noticed. I don't know what to say about it, but I've noticed that former college athletes are much more likely to hire than non-athletes. White females less likely to hire than Indian females. Asian males more likely to hire than white males. These things are unfortunate things that I have noticed, and I could quantify probably if I wanted to. And This is just what happens in many places. It doesn't mean this is true all the time, but your social background can make a difference to some extent and can overcome things like your law school. And so whatever the position you're looking for is, you should try to some extent work with and work in places where, where that gives you an advantage and not a disadvantage. Okay, so the next thing that's important is your commitment to, and this is the final thing, to working in a law firm. And if you take time off and you go in-house or you do something else, it's typically not a good thing. If you have always worked in a law firm, and law firms are going to assume that you're going to want to be there over the long run, and that's going to help you a great deal. And the longer you're in a law firm and the more you've been in a law firm and that's the only thing you've done, the more that's going to help you. The big conclusion here, I think, that I want to just emphasize is your legal career really is a race. Your objective is to join the race, regardless of where you got into the race and what law school you went to. There's many more important factors than where you went to law school. And just remember, many people graduate from law school when they're 24, 25. Your career in a law firm could be for over 60 years after that. So why should you be limiting yourself based on with these self-imposed restrictions based on where you went to law school? I talk to attorneys all day who went to Yale and all these great schools, and they expect firms to open up to them. But honestly, they will at first. But after they've seen the decisions you made, meaning your work ethic, your commitment, and so forth, they're much more likely to want people that have different objectives. They want people that are going to stick with the law firms. And so you just have to understand that it's ridiculous for you to believe, if you went to a good law school, that those qualifications are going to keep you in a law firm. It's just not what happens. It's the decisions you make. So I'm going to take a quick break, and then when I come back, I will take as many questions as everyone has. Thank you. All right, so let's get started. Yeah, as many questions as anyone has, I'm happy to get through them all. And let's see, and we'll get started here. Let me just see here. And I will go to the most recent ones first. Let's see here. Okay, the first question is, hi, Harrison. I just read your article, The Dark Side of Going In-House. Was just curious, how often do you see in-house attorneys get let go when they were just the bearer of bad news? They gave their opinion the company would be liable if something that were not the cause of the problem. Yes, I see that quite a bit. It's something that is fairly common. I think that, and it's unfortunate, I think that a lot of companies, in-house companies, I don't know if a lot is the right thing to say, but I've seen it happen several times. If you are there and you're pointing out things that are negative in the company that could get them into trouble, they may want to do those things, and they may want to do them because the executives are trying to make money for this, get the stock price up. They're trying to, there could be all sorts of reasons for it. If you are seen as someone that's an impediment to the law firm growing, or the law firm having, not the law firm, sorry, the company growing, or the company getting the things it does, instead of figuring out the solution to what happens or figuring out a workaround, then many people will end up letting you go. I know someone that went to a company, and he was there a very short time, and he figured out that the company was doing something illegal. They wanted him to sign off on, I don't know, some results or something of their profits for the SEC, and it wasn't true, and he didn't, and then they found out a reason to let him go. It's very difficult being else. It can be a real political game, and I think your question is very good, and it does happen quite a bit that people get in trouble. If the company doesn't want them to do something, it just depends on the company. Many times, and especially with smaller companies, if you look at all the people that go to prison and so forth all the time, the numbers are huge. And inside of companies. And those are just the people that are getting caught doing things. And a lot of people are doing things where they're not getting caught. You just have to remember that if you're in a company, many times they're going to want the general counsel or the person that's in charge of the legal department to sign to help them with negative things, or to help them approve negative things. And honestly, if you do that, you'll always be the fall person. It can destroy your career. So you do need to be careful. I remember dealing not too long ago with some attorneys at General Motors, and General Motors had this issue where they had some problems with their seatbelts or something. And they said that the legal department had signed off on it, and the seatbelts had ended up hurting some people or killing them. And someone I knew that was in the legal department that had absolutely nothing to do with it was supposedly one of the people that signed off on it, and kind of got blackballed for the rest of his career. So it's just, you have to be very careful about anytime a company asks you to do something like that. And because you can get in trouble. And most of the time you probably won't. And most of the time means a substantial percentage of the time. But if you do get fired for something like that, you also typically have a whistleblower complaint. And I've noticed that whistleblower complaints can be whistleblower collections can be very large. I just read about $100 million one last week. So it just depends on you. But let's see. I've been lucky enough to run my own firm in a small town America for 23 years. I do helping people, but I need a change. Anything you can suggest to help me? Yeah, I don't know. One of the things you can always do is change your practice area if you like doing that. I think the practice area you're in can make a big difference. Yeah, but I don't know if you need a change. The other thing would be going to work inside of companies near where you work or near your town. That could also be helpful. That's something you could also look at very closely and see if there's something that you could do with that. And yeah, so I would recommend if you want to do that or go to work for the government. 23 years isn't that long. It sounds like you graduated in the mid 90s, so you still have another, 20 plus years of your career. There's lots of things you can do. I'm always hesitant though when someone tells me they want to leave a small, their own practice, because it's very difficult to establish a practice. So it's something I would think about. Okay, so let's see the next question. I'm a 2L at a lower ranked law school. Although I'm not at the very top of my class, I wrote onto my school's flagship law review. Are these factors enough to satisfy your second rule, the one performed in law school? Yeah, so being on law review is good. You should throw yourself into that. That teaches a lot of how to be a very good writer and pay attention to minutiae and keep your language tight and check citations. And all those are very good skills for an attorney to have. Being a lower ranked law school, again, is not something that should ever stop you. The most important factor is going to be the amount of business you have and your commitment. But yeah, I think being on law review is definitely helpful. And then to the extent you can get very good jobs in the summer. So it looks like you're a 2L. So you can work with a very good attorney, or you can get a clerkship, a federal clerkship or a judicial clerkship is always helpful because you can learn directly from a judge and get really good training. That could be helpful too. Okay, let's see. I read an article you wrote on Law Crossing recently titled, "Is it bad to be part of or join a firm with high turnover?" You mentioned mass turnover. I would like to ask you what percentage constitutes mass turnover. Could you also say what turnover rates at law firms could be normal? Okay, there's different types of turnover that kind of happens in law firms. So there's turnover many times that are caused just by with people leaving for various reasons. And then there's turnover that's caused by external events. And I'll just go over the different types of turnover. So one type of turnover could be that the law firm has lost some major clients and or is having problems financially and it can't pay people. And so people are leaving because of that. So that's usually a bad sign. And then they still need to replace people, but that doesn't mean they're doing so in an effective way. And the ability of a law firm to manage its finances is hugely important. And so you need to join a firm where that has a very good ability to manage its finances and manages it and has an historic way of doing that. So that's one type of turnover. Another type of turnover is maybe the law firm just is paying below market. And there's lots of law firms that pay very poorly. And the second someone gets a job that pays better, they will leave and find a new one. So that's another type of turnover. And if a law firm has that type of turnover, you also need to be very careful about joining a firm like that. And the other types of turnover may be because there's very toxic people that are working in the firm, and they make it very hard for the people that are working there, or maybe the hours are too much. And so there's all sorts of reasons for turnover inside of law firms. So you need to get to the bottom of what the turnover is really about. And once you understand what the turnover is about, then you can make better decisions about whether or not that's the type of law firm you want to work in. But understanding the turnover, sometimes firms will get younger leadership, and the younger leadership may push out a lot of older partners without business, or may make it more difficult for people or may want to push out of various practice groups. Like a lot of law firms sometimes will eliminate different things. Like a big thing that people are eliminating now is like a lot of patent prosecution work inside of major law firms, because a lot of the work rates are fixed, and large law firms want hourly billing, or they may be eliminating labor and employment because the billing rates are lower. And so there's just, you have to understand what's causing the turnover. And so just trying to get to the bottom of it many times, and sometimes you can do that just by reading things that are being said about the firm online can be very helpful. But that's how I would recommend understanding turnover, because it's not necessarily bad to join a law firm with poor turnover, but you just need to understand why. Sometimes it's a good thing because sometimes the turnover has been caused by the law firm trying to fix things wrong with it. Okay, yeah, and as many questions as anyone has, I'm happy to answer them. So just anything you can think of related to your career or today's presentation about law firms, happy to answer them. Okay, let's see the next question. I have been practicing law for 2 years. I spent my first year as a personal injury attorney. I then made the switch to insurance defense. I initially took a position as a personal injury attorney because I went to law school out of state and decided last minute to move back to New York. I'm not happy in my current practice area and would like to switch to business transactional law. If I could have chosen my practice area straight out of law school, I would have chosen that area. Now I feel as though making the transition would be extremely hard. I read an article on BCG's website about making the transition, decided to reach out to a recruiter to learn more about the progress and see if it is possible. It is even possible at this point. How should I go about making this change? Okay, that's a great question. The thing is, there's nothing wrong with practicing personal injury. As a matter of fact, some of the highest paid attorneys in the country and the ones that are the most fulfilled are personal injury attorneys. You shouldn't have to apologize for any practice area that you're in. Every practice area serves purpose, and you may have enjoyed it. Now, I don't know why you made the switch to insurance defense, because that's a different type of practice area, but typically there's going to be a lot more employment stability in insurance defense, and you may enjoy that more. I don't know why you want to do corporate transactional work now. Corporate transactional work, one of the things I like to say in these webinars and I write about that's very important is corporate transactional work, and most types of transactional work should be like real estate or corporate or patent law and tax, and tend to attract people that are very good at things like math and science. It would be that it's the math and science. So if you were like naturally interested in those practice area and those sorts of things when you were in school, that then corporate tends to be people that go into corporate tend to be better at that. And if you were more interested in reading and writing, the history and English and so forth, those are things that litigators typically do. So that's one of the reasons, one of the things that I tell people in terms of how do you choose the best practice area for you, and typically thinking that way is something I recommend. Now, making a transition to business or transactional can be very difficult, and there's a lot of ways to do it. One way would be to join a firm that would allow you to do a general practice. Another would be to join a smaller firm in a smaller market. Attorneys in smaller markets tend to do multiple practice areas and in smaller firms, and attorneys in large firms tend to specialize. The problem with lateraling to a larger firm or lateraling to a firm as a corporate attorney is most firms that have an opening for a corporate attorney are going to want to hire someone that already has that experience. They're not going to want to have to train them. And right now, you've been trained as a litigator. So doing personal injuries litigation, and so is insurance defense. My suggestion would be to try to move to a smaller market. And that could be a smaller firm, whether it's in New York City or in wherever you are in New York State, and try to work in a firm where it's smaller, where they have a general practice, where you can do litigation at corporate. And that way you can get a sense if that's something you want to do, or a solo practitioner or something along those lines that may do, or just a smaller firm or a general practice firm that may allow you to do that. That's how I would do that. It is difficult, and you have to really understand whether or not if that's the kind of work you want to do. But if it is, I think that would be very helpful. Okay, let's see here. In today's legal market, would an attorney with several years of non-legal experience in business and marketing have any edge over traditional straight out of law school candidates? I'm considering returning from business to the practice of law. Hence this question. Yeah, I think any attorney with a lot of experience in business and marketing does have an edge. I think that would be especially true for starting your own firm and understanding the business of that. Most attorneys do not understand business very well, and that very helpful for you. So that's how I would recommend doing that. Whether it's in terms of a law firm, there's a lot of role firms these days for people that are kind of experts. A large firm left the week before, and she had a great job. I think she was making $250,000 a year, just putting together pitches, helping with the firm's client. So that's pretty cool. I didn't realize that there were jobs like that, but there's jobs like that. So there's all sorts of that you can take inside of law firms that take make use out of your skills, which is exciting. So thanks. Okay. Here. Okay. I read several articles about finding the right environment for your skills. I currently work for a major retailer. For the first 18 months, I was a solid performer headed on a leadership track. In the last 9 months, I have a new leader and have been disciplined 3 times for work performance issues I never had before. Told I'm not a good fit for the job despite my previous run. More discipline, I'll be fired. Working floor articles don't say don't quit without a job lined up. Just okay, yeah, so that's a good point. Many times, especially inside of companies, the leadership will change. And that's one of the difficulties of practicing in-house is when the leadership changes, you'll be working with people with different standards and different expectations, I guess is the better way of putting it. So something that may have been rewarded by your previous boss is no longer rewarded. And so that's not good. If you can't, the first thing is I would try to make the most of the experience in terms of what their expectations are and try to figure out how to thrive in that environment, which sounds like it's going to be next to impossible, but being able to get along in different environments and with different types of people can be a real skill, because then when you find a new place, you'll appreciate it. I would, definitely try to find another job. I don't know where that would be or what kind of work you do exactly, but I would do whatever I could to find another position if it's not working out with that person. And it sounds like it's just not a good fit, and that's fine. But you need to find a place where it is a good fit. And the biggest thing, reading the articles is helpful, but I think the biggest thing many times when you're in that kind of situation is taking action. If you do get fired, there's nothing wrong with it. Typically, when people believe they're going to get fired, they start documenting everything that happened in case they need backup later. You need to write down what was said, what happened, because the firm's going to be doing the same thing with you. I would just make sure you're doing everything you're supposed to and just be very careful. And then in terms of finding the right environment can mean a lot of different things. Environment can be a geographic change many times, or it can be a different practice setting. It can be all sorts of things. You may be more comfortable in a government environment or a public interest environment, or working for another type of company, or you might even be more comfortable in a law firm. You just don't know. So you need to make sure that you find the right environment for you, I think is one of the most important things. And that's really the biggest thing, in a place where your background and skills are rewarded. I'll just never forget that when I was in 8th grade, I was basically kicked out of a middle school and told I was a horrible student and all these things. And then I went to an even more competitive high school that I only got into because my father had gone there and my grandmother had worked there and did great. When they liked me, and it was just a different environment. It was nothing, I hadn't changed. It's just the environment had changed. And then I just excelled and had a great time there. So it just all depends on the environment you're in. And I agree that being in the right environment is very important. Okay, it says, next question is, I'm an attorney from Washington, D.C. with mostly in-house experience. I've been looking for a new legal job for the past few months, and there's been a struggle. I found it impossible to get my foot in the door at larger firms or to find a position in smaller firms. Is there any help you could offer? Yes. The problem with Washington, D.C. is anytime you get into a very sophisticated legal market, and Washington, D.C. is about the most sophisticated there is, the qualifications that are required for attorneys to get jobs there, the competition for jobs, the number of attorneys competing for the same jobs, the number of attorneys in the city is huge. There's no more competitive market than maybe Washington, D.C. for finding a job. And all of the law firms there are very interested in your credentials. They're interested in your experience, your background, and it's very difficult. And so I just really would recommend, that you do what you can to maybe look at other legal markets as well. It's going to be difficult to get your foot in the door in larger firms, because larger firms are hiring people that are coming from the same background. They want people that are also from large firms for the most part, that have law firm training, and then the smaller firms, it's also going to be very competitive to get positions there. And they're also going to be hiring mainly from other law firms. So if you really want to get another position, and work in a law firm, my advice would be to try to work in other legal markets. I think a lot of times young attorneys especially will glorify working in New York City or Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles or Miami, what a big market, or Austin is another one, or they'll glorify working in these big markets, but really your objective is to get experience. And the better experience you get, the better off you're going to be. So if you want to work in a law firm, even a large law firm, you need to start looking at smaller markets. And that could just mean looking at Baltimore, for example, or Maryland or Northern Virginia, but just moving away from the rat race of trying to find a position in DC. And then it could also mean doing another practice area. I don't know where your practice area is, but depending on your practice area, it's also going to be very competitive. So DC is the majority of attorneys in DC do litigation related work, whereas the majority of attorneys in New York do corporate related work. When you look at the law firms in Washington, DC, and you see who's there, them doing litigation related work or policy stuff, and very few doing corporate. Whereas when you look at the law firms in New York, you have most of them doing corporate work and then very few of them doing litigation. So I would do my best to try to look at other markets and depending on your practice area. But the more markets you look at, the better off you're going to be. Okay. Oh, and then one final thing that I just would recommend is I would recommend also applying to firms many times without openings. So that can be very helpful. Because sometimes when you're applying to firms with openings, which everyone in Washington, D.C. is doing, it becomes much more difficult to find jobs. I am an over 50 patent attorney currently working as an R&D chemist at a coatings company to keep my finances going while attempting to secure contract work with other firms, plus 1 or 2 clients of my own. I have some bites from a few Washington and Oregon firms close to where I live, but I'm now venturing out to Midwest locations, Minnesota, Colorado, and Utah. Obviously, it is tough trying to get to that first or second year since the law firms are looking to hire for 2+ years. What are my chances based on my resume and this information? Is there anything else I can do to sell my experience and accomplishments? Okay. All right. Yeah. So what the most important thing you should do is you need to figure out the law firms and that are around the country that do the exact type of work you do. So most patent attorneys have experience in a certain type of practice area, and most attorneys do. So if you're doing coatings, working at an R&D company in a coatings company, then, for example, and I don't know if this is true, but you may have experience patenting coatings for different types of applications, and then you might be an expert on that. So the objective would be you could use Google and other search methods to find firms that do that type of work. Then the other things that you can do would be most patent attorneys. I work with lots of patent attorneys, and I'm able to place the majority of them or get them interviews. And the reason is because there's so many firms out there that do patent work. So you can't just, with patent is an interesting practice area, but most law firms that do patent work, because less than 2% of all attorneys are patent attorneys, most law firms that do patent work are always looking for patent attorneys. If you have the right background, you show up at the right time, they're always going to be interested in you. You can apply to do research of every firm that does patent law. And once you find that, you should just apply to them because they will hire opportunistically. They may have the work. If they have the work, they can usually make money with you and do things that way. And the other thing is, there's lots and lots of virtual jobs for patent attorneys. You don't always need to be licensed in the city where you're working if you're working remotely because you're practicing before the patent office, which just requires the patent bar, and then it's federal. You should have no problem as an over 50 patent attorney finding patent work. It's not that difficult, but you have to look at a lot of places. And in most markets, there's tons of patent attorneys. There's lots and lots of them. And they don't always need business from patent attorneys either. So I think you can find a job, but I think you need to actually pick up your search and be a little bit more aggressive in terms of the markets you're looking at, which is in Oregon and Washington. And you are going to get bites, but you need to apply to all the patent firms, not just ones with openings. Okay, let's see. Here's another patent question. Yeah, and anybody, as many questions as you guys have, I'm definitely happy to answer them all. And I'm going to answer them all today. And there's still quite a few. Okay. I am a young attorney with 2 years of experience as an IP attorney with patent experience. I'm eligible to take the patent bar and intend to do so in the near future. I worked for a firm for a year and have been a solo practitioner for the last year. Solo practice is enjoyable, but somewhat unstable. I would like more experience, a little bit more oversight, practicing to learn about the business. We'll learn about the business law firms and gaining clients and earning before I practice solo again. Do you think a recruiter's successful service would be successful for candidates such as myself? No, I don't. And the reason is because you can certainly use services that we have, like Law Crossing Concierge, for example, that can help you. But in general, if you want to be, if you have patent experience, that's good, but you need to take the patent bar first. So in order to get a position, you're going to need the patent bar. Once you have the patent bar and you pass that, I don't think you're going to have any problem getting a job, but you need to do it the way that I explained to the previous question, which would be applying to every firm with a patent practice. I don't know what your background is in patent law, whether it's biotech or engineering or electrical engineering, or but it would be hard in soft sciences. You need to basically apply to every patent place you could possibly find, but you need to take the patent bar. That's very important. The other thing is, I don't know the practicing solo is a good idea. Lots of attorneys that are patent attorneys practice solo because they have books of business, and that's very helpful for them practicing solo. And they are able to, with those books of business, they can make much more money than they would make on their own working in a law firm because they keep more of the money. But at the same time, I would recommend working for a law firm for several years and getting lots of training and being a good patent attorney before you strike out on your own. So I would try to do that. The other thing you could do as well is you could take the patent bar, then go to work for the USPTO and get some training there, and then move back later on to a law firm. Okay, let's see. Okay, I am a non-traditional applicant and would highly value your perspective, given BCG's expertise. I am 48, hold an MBA, and have been involved with business development within the technology sector for my career. My strong desire is to go to law school. I scored a 165 MailSat and have a GPA of 3.6. So I'm looking at SMU here in Dallas as a part-time student. As a former Olympic athlete, wow, veteran and one who has worked with younger folks, I firmly believe I have value to a firm from a work-hard team player and one you can generate business perspectives. Would you share your thoughts on the market for older folks? Is the market reasonable? So with your LSAT and grade point, you could probably get into University of Texas. I would definitely think about that, especially since it sounds like you're in Austin or you're in Fort Worth around there, but you could certainly, oh, you're in Dallas. Okay. Yeah, Dallas. But I would think about maybe University of Texas because it's a higher ranked school and it's probably going to be virtual next year anyway. I would do that. I don't think at the age of 48, I think you're perfectly fine. And coming out of school, I don't think you'll have any problem getting a job, especially with your pedigree. I do think, though, that you could go to lots and lots of law schools, and the quality of law school you go to will make a difference, and your LSATs are fine to get into most law schools, I would think. So I don't think you really have anything to do with that. The Texas market is a place where you can get a job. Lots of attorneys come out of law school in their 40s and 50s and are able to get jobs. And just remember that you still have at least 20 to 25 more years practicing law after coming out. So I don't think that you'll have any problems. So the only thing I would say is there is an opportunity cost for the time you're in law school, and then you're coming out and you're starting as a new attorney. So there's an opportunity cost for your income there. But if it's something you're interested in, then that could be a good idea. And I don't see any reason why you shouldn't do it. Thank you for the webinars. Do you have any recommendations for a retired assistant county prosecutor with 30 years of experience? Yeah, you can you can go into criminal defense and work for a local attorney there. You could hang out your own shingle doing criminal defense. You could write briefs for other attorneys. You could potentially teach a class in law school if you were interested in doing that. You could join lots of law firms. I don't know where you're working, but there's lots of law firms. There may be other government jobs you could get. And those are all things that I would recommend doing. If it was me and I was in your situation, I would probably become a criminal defense attorney just because I think it would be fun. And then maybe even get on a panel so you can get assigned cases from judges to do that. Or if you have a good reputation, you might even be able to do that, just bring in your own clients. But I think that would be fun. Or you could just go into a different practice area altogether. Family law is very active right now. I'm sure you could figure that out very easily. But there's a lot of things you can do after being a prosecutor. So that's cool. That seems fun. Okay, I am an attorney licensed in Washington State. I left my small criminal defense practice in Vancouver, Washington, following the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. I joined the U.S. Navy and became a naval aviator. Wow. During that time, I've been deployed to numerous theaters around the world, flown multiple combat missions, been selected for an instructor duty, earned a master's degree. Wow. I've also maintained my active law license over the years. I'm now looking to transition back to the practice of law. I graduated from middle of the pack law school at the University of Idaho in 2001 in the middle of my class. I was admitted to the bar in Washington State in 2002. Where does a veteran fit in? Where does someone pick back up with the law after being away from it? There's plenty of firms that will hire you. It sounds like, I don't know how many, how experienced you are, but I don't think you'll have too much difficulty getting a position It sounds like you've gotten very good experience. The only concern that I would have would be the fact of how long you've been away and the fact that you've chosen another career. What I would recommend would be many times there's government programs for people that are coming out of the government and to get them positions with other government agencies, which I would look into. And I think that you could probably get a position with a government as an attorney. Things like being a prosecutor, like a previous person asked, could also be a good idea. So I would maybe look into that. And then, yeah, but those are all good questions. I don't know at this point that your where you went to law school matters. The thing that does matter though are the choices you've been making with your legal career over the past 20 years. It would indicate to most people that you're probably more interested in doing something else or were, and that would be my only concern. You can always start your own practice, and there's plenty of firms. I would investigate firms with a lot of veterans in them as well, and talk to them about that. So that's how I would handle that. Okay, let's see. Last question, and then if anybody doesn't have any more, if you ask any other questions after while I'm answering this, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, it will be done. Regarding the earlier in-house question in practice areas, is it easy to move back and forth between in-house and law firms for a mid-career patent attorney? Would it help to mention the long hours worked and range of technologies you worked at while in-house? It is much easier as a patent attorney working in-house to move back and forth than it is in other practice areas. It's still not easy. Law firms prefer to hire people that are coming from similar practice settings because there's different expectations when you're working in a company as opposed to when you're working outside a company and working for the company who's paying. Many times, if they're being paid a flat fee inside of a law firm, they will expect you to get work done at a certain speed and so forth. And if you're not doing that, it can create problems. Yes, it does help if you mentioned the long hours worked and the range of technologies. So ultimately, law firms are going to be most concerned about the quality and the type of work that you did inside of a law firm. Yeah. And then the next question is, how can we I'll just answer this. I think that's it. And yeah, that I have. So thank you everybody for attending, and we will talk next week. Thanks.